Hello, my conscious and inquisitive tribe, and welcome to Rewoke, Rewriting Our Kids' Education podcast. My name is Michelle Person, and I welcome you on our journey of rethinking, re-examining, and re-educating ourselves and our children. We have spent a lot of time this season discussing what happens in the school and what instruction should look like. Today, we are going to explore a different type of school and how they approach instructing scholars. Last season, we spoke to Ariel Hayes, the principal of a Montessori school, and discussed how that framework compared to a traditional public school. Today, our guest is Denecia Dillard, executive principal at Lake Erie College Prep and East Academy School in Cleveland, Ohio. Both of the schools she oversees are charters, and today she is going to explain what that really means. During my career, I have taught in charter and traditional schools. I have helped to both found a charter school and I have been the principal of both. So I personally have my own opinions about charter schools, and that is why I love this quote by Marshall Fritz, the American libertarian activist. Charter schools are just public schools on a slightly longer leash. A dog on a leash is still a dog on a leash. I personally am tired of being on a leash, but that's a topic for another show. And oh yeah, are you woke? What is a charter school and how did they come to be? I'll give you the Cliff Notes version. Around 1988, a professor at the University of Massachusetts Amherst came up with the idea of establishing schools of choice. The goal was to create a legally and financially autonomous school without tuition, religious affiliation, or selective student admissions that would operate more like a private business, free from many of the state laws and district regulations that traditional schools are required to comply with, but that would also be more accountable for student outcomes. Minnesota was the first state to pass a charter school law in 1991. As of the date of this recording, 45 states have charter school laws on the books. In the media, charter schools have been accused of having less qualified teachers for children, treating special education children differently, and having a tendency to poach the best students from certain districts. All the bad press that exists, and yet charter schools still exist. And that is because proponents of the schools love the small community feel, increased flexibility, and the special focuses that an individual school might have. Like I said, I've had extensive experience with both, and I can tell you that there is truth to both sides. Our guest today has been a leader in the charter world for over a decade, and she knows the ins and outs better than most. And she is here with us today to see if the charter option is right for you. Denecia Dillard, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me.
You know, we could not do a school about charters and not have you on the show. Give us a little bit of background. Tell us a little bit about your, how you came to be where you are right now in your career and what makes you an authority to talk on this subject.
Well, if you take it all the way back, you couldn't have told me in high school that I would end up being an educator, let alone someone's principal. So I find joy in looking back on that. Education is my second career. So my first career was definitely in business for many, many years. But all of my mentors, to the person, they're all educators. Mm-hmm. And they all said, for years, you're misplaced. You need to be in a different field. And so I started looking into it. And I started subbing to see how I liked it and went back to school and took a few more courses. And lo and behold, this is almost 12 years later. I went from middle school ELA to AP to a director for a very, very short time period. To principal. So this has been about 12 years in the making, to see students that came to me as fifth graders or sixth graders graduating from college with families and coming back to me for references for working in the field. That that's what it's about. It gives me a sense of fulfillment. So
Awesome. So you are, and now most of your 12 years, you have been almost primarily in the charter world, correct?
yes, I did a very, very brief stint in public, and it was not for me.
Mhm.
And I landed in the charter world, and I saw a group of rebels, so I went with it.
And that's why I wanted you to come on, because I've done both. I've done public and I've done charter, and I wanted somebody who not only was in it but who loved it, because I can be being as a, I guess you could say I'm kind of a reporter. When you're presenting information, I have biases. Like I left charter for very specific reasons, and honestly, I've now left public for very specific reasons,
Mhm.
because neither one of them is perfect. But
True,
I wanted,
true.
they are both frustratingly like ridiculous. But I wanted somebody who was in charter right now, and chose to be there. So that's why I wanted to reach out and have you speak. So can you tell? The first off, we keep throwing around these terms: charter school, public school, and for those who are uninitiated, what is the difference, in your opinion, between a public school and a public charter school?
And the public charter. Well, first, we have about 3 million students across the U.S. that attend public charter schools. And forgive me, I want to take these bangles off so they don't keep clacking. That attend public charter schools. So that's about 6% of the total students that are available to attend school. Charters are tuition free. They're open to all students. They follow the same state and academic and financial accountability standards that you would find in a public district. We were talking earlier about kind of when this thing began in about 1991, 1992. The whole push for education choice and something different to offer to the student population came about, and the charter movement was birthed. So, unlike traditional public schools, charters are ran independently from the school district. So, while wherever city you live in has a main school district, you may find some independent schools that aren't a part of that district that are either going to be private or probably a public charter school. Um, they operate under performance contracts that are with authorizers, and those authorizers could be the district, it could be the state, it could be some other appointed and approved entity that holds them accountable. And if they fail at any point of those accountability checks, they run the risk of being shut down or sanctioned or put on some form of improvement plan.
Okay.
So, in exchange for a little more autonomy, I guess, than maybe a traditional public school, they get more flexibility to shape their classrooms and their school communities to fit the need of their specific demographic of students. So, I think that's kind of the main difference for me, in my opinion.
Okay, so I tell you what I think the main difference is, that one of the things that people very often say inaccurately. For me, having been a leader of both, charters run on a shoestring budget a lot of times, and public schools is where the money is.
Well,
The
that's
trade
true.
off, right? The trade and the common misconception out there is that charters have all this money and they're stealing these kids. It's like, no, these charters are being run in best case scenarios by people who really want to educate children differently. And they believe in a specific method or an ideal, and they want to be able to implement that method or ideal without a lot of the bureaucracy that comes from traditional public systems. Like, the story I tell all the time is, I wanted to take my kids on a field trip at my very first school, public school, Newark, New Jersey. And we wanted to go to the park. And the levels of bureaucracy that were involved in taking my kids to the park was insane. A charter school, you want to go to the park? Here's a form, have the parents sign it, go to the park. Like
Go to
that.
the park.
That's the difference between, the difference between, in my opinion, a charter and a traditional public school. There is a lot more when you talk about that freedom. That's that freedom that you get to experience and see. However, you guys do not. I think it's a total misconception that you guys are just stealing money from the big districts, or you guys
We
have.
operate We operate either in some cases, depending on the states, with half the budget that you would give to public. But in most cases, it's a quarter of the budget. In most cases, it's a quarter of the budget that is afforded uh, to most, traditional public schools. Um, and if you talk about, fairness or unfairness, we're held to the same
Mm,
accountabilities. We have to do the exact same thing.
mhm.
Um, that makes it a little hard, but if you have that rebel mindset, that activist mindset, and you educate by any means necessary, then, you know, let's take COVID for instance. Pre-COVID, most in the charter world didn't have all of the bells and whistles and technology and, one-to-one technology. COVID kind of lifted up the skirt a little bit on education and the inequalities in education. And because of that, for the schools in the area that I serve, we now are almost one to one, and that was unheard of just 2 years ago.
Uh,
Unheard of, and that's normal course in most districts that you get one to one technology.
we're about to 100% go off the rails because that's one of my common misconception is that forget even charter public, and we're about to go into a whole different show. There is suburban and then there's urban. Transparency, Denecia and I used to lead in the same city. And I taught on one side of the city, or rather, I led a building on one side of the city. Denecia led a building on another side of the city. But my building was an urban public school, and just like you, we had no technology. We couldn't. I every year asked for money for new technology. I had 400 kids. I had 75 computers. We had to take turns trying to get these devices. Testing online was a hot mess, and COVID hit, and we had to very quietly, when they said, "Oh, give the computers to the parents." I got 400 families and 75 computers. So I had to very quietly reach out to people who were deemed most important, first of all, and give them computers first, and then give out the rest of my computers. But what happened was, then the government gave money. Then everybody got money. So because of COVID, the things that my building had been asking for 4 years, I've been advocating for my children for 4 years, trying to get them access to computers. COVID happened, everybody got computers. That was
Everybody got them. It really leveled the playing field, but then it showcased the different parts of the playing field, and that it peeked into the families' households a little more.
mm,
Because although you gave them this brand new Chromebook or this brand new, laptop or tablet, families didn't have access to the internet.
mhm.
So that created, another social need that the schools had to step in. It didn't matter what school, public, private, charter, they had to step in to figure out, well, can we link with some community organization to provide, internet service to the families? Because we've given them the computer, but unless they're sitting in a McDonald's parking lot that is closed now
It's a
because
really
of
nice
COVID,
paperweight.
it doesn't work.
Mhm. Mhm.
So
Yeah. So, well, okay, to get back on topic, because I'm telling you, educate. This is why I love this podcast, because you can go education, you start down one street and then you take a left turn and you can end up on a whole different street because that's just how topsy turvy the world is.
yes,
But we were talking about the fact that there are some major differences between charters and traditional public schools. The main thing being, in a charter school, you have a little bit more freedom to decide how you want to educate the kids. However, you are a little bit more financially constrained with what you can do in terms of what you can provide. So my question is then, in your opinion, Denecia, why would a parent consider a school that might have less funding and to be able to support my student, versus the school down the street, which has more funding, more resources? So why should I, as a parent, consider a charter school that might not have all the resources that the school down the street does?
so let me preface this by saying more tech does not make a better educator.
Mhm.
So because you have, an LED light show in your science classroom does not in fact make you a good science teacher. So I truly believe that parents need to weigh the options that are available to them. Depending on their geographical area, they probably have all three, public, private, or charter, available to them. and all three are probably going to offer something different. Um, Local charters I've found have a more smaller school feel. Some parents are attracted to that, that it's not 1,200, 1,500 kids in the building. This school only has 300 to 400 students. And that pushes a more family like atmosphere, especially if the kid stays and matriculates through the system. That whole school knows your baby.
Mhm.
And so it's a little different to say, I know Miss Such and Such because, she was my first grade teacher and I'm a sixth grade kid now, you
Mhm.
know. So that sense of familiarity of the village mindset,
Mhm.
I think may be an attractive push for some families.
Okay. There
Mhm.
are some other negative connotations or perceptions that are out there, and I want you to. I'm going to name off a couple, and I just want you to speak to them. So there's the first one is that charter schools are not as academically rigorous.
Mhm.
People, they go to that charter school. They don't do real work over there. What would you say to someone who said, well, I would say they should duck if they said that to you, but if but what would you say to someone who came and that was their opinion of the level of academic rigidness at a charter school?
Well, I will caution that person against painting all charter schools with the same brush. Charter schools they aren't a monolith. They all operate differently according to whatever their mission or vision statement is that they put out to their stakeholders. I found that many charter schools hold their respective student body to a high academic standard. Not to say that your public counterparts don't, but because of how the charters are built, because it is a small school feel, these are the expectations, and we're going to get you to these expectations. You may come in 2 grades behind, reading level wise or math wise, but by the time you finish, with said school, you should either be on level or gaining a half a year to a year each time as you work your way through that program. And not to say that public doesn't care, but you have to search a little harder to find the teachers within public
Mhm.
who would put that time in because they're so stressed with what they have going on. So, are all charters perfect? I don't think any school is perfect.
Mhm.
Um, and they need their feet held to the fire if they are not having high academic standards for
Mhm.
your babies, because your children deserve that. So go visit them, go check them out. The ones I have been associated with, we have high academic standards.
And I can vouch for that. I know that they do. What about the other common misconception that not all students are welcome at charters, specifically students with learning disabilities? The very untrue thing that people often say is that, oh, well, they won't take this kid because they have this, or they don't deal with, they're not required to take children with learning, with special learning needs. I could answer that question, but I'm going to let you answer that question.
Well, help me, because I may mis misquote this, but public charters kind of have to function like a public school.
Correct.
So public charters can't turn away a student. They're held to the same accountabilities. Again, this is doing your research. So if it's a student with disabilities, public charters, the reason I think families may swing their way, they may not like that their child in a public setting or public school setting is, in an enclosed, teaching model. And most charters, public charters, do offer where that kid is put in with the general population and educated right alongside their peers. And that then they kick into targeted intervention, pullouts with small group instruction. So they find different ways to educate that child without segregating that child.
Mhm.
So some families may find that to be a plus, but a public charter can't tell you your kid can't come.
And that is 100% accurate. A
Yes.
public charter school cannot say that a child cannot come. What I do caution families a lot is, however, sometimes I need you to understand that sometimes the public school might, depending on the needs of your student, might actually be the best place for your child with special needs. You might want a school, you've heard great things about it and you think your child will do well there. But if your child has significant, and just being 100%, the first thing we talked about was that they run on a much stricter budget. So a lot of
It's
the
the money.
resources
Mhm.
that you might have at a traditional public school, you might not have or find at they have to be creative. They have to do that that different type of thinking. And that might not fit the needs of your baby. So like Denecia was saying, you definitely should be doing your homework, figuring out what works for you and your scholar. And it's not that your kid would not be able to attend. It is simply that that school might not be able to offer the resources that you are used to getting at your traditional public school. So
Absolutely.
I think,
That's it. That's it in a nutshell.
mhm, mhm. So yeah, I think that that's the perfect way to sum that one up. Um, Now, one of the things that has become like we were again talking before we got on, and when doing my research, 91, 92 was when charter schools kind of started by someone. The idea was proposed by a professor at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, I believe it was, and it was an idea of being able to run a school more like a business and circumvent the bureaucracy, which is what we've talked about here today. But I think an unintended consequence of that was that more than they anticipated, Black and brown children flocking to these schools than were originally anticipated. Like these schools were not originally cultivated for Black and brown children. They were cultivated to circumvent, whatever issue that the stay-at-home moms were having with the school district that they were in, and they wanted, more of one type of teaching strategy, or they wanted more this or more of that. They wanted to, so they were like, well, we're going to circumvent the system and we're going to create our own teaching model. We're going to do it our own way. What actually has happened is that charters have flourished in Black and brown communities. Why do you think that is?
Well,
As she takes a as she takes a sip of her
my coffee there. Um, you have to look at where they were allowed to place charters. And originally, charters were only allowed to be put in disadvantaged communities.
Mhm,
And so, because they were put in disadvantaged communities, it netted them a certain demographic,
mhm,
you know.
mhm,
Um, Over time, parent choice has probably played much more of a part in that. But originally, it's you saw an influx of Black and brown students because it was in a Black and brown neighborhood,
mhm,
and parents, for whatever their reasons were, didn't want their babies going to the public school, either for safety reasons that were cited, or they just wanted their kid not to get lost in the shuffle of, of going to school. Um, it's a smaller overall school size. Sometimes not always a smaller class size, but overall school size,
mhm.
it is a smaller school size. The staff gets to better know the babies in the building. And so, it, again, it was unintended. It was unintended, but intended, I think. I
I
mean,
think
you put a school on 40th in Cleveland. What kid do you think you're going to get? You
I
know,
think I think what happened in theory was and again, I'm speaking off the cuff right now. I actually have not read, but I think what actually happened, and it makes sense, is that the idea was for one group of people to be able to circumvent, but then in practice, that same group of people said, we're not going to experiment with our kids. And so they were like, well, this is a really neat concept. We should try it out somewhere. And guess where they tried it out? And then now to that point, there have been some I've worked at several very successful charter schools. I am all the time. You hear me? I love KIPP, the Knowledge is Power program. It's nationwide. I've worked at two different schools. I helped found one. I love KIPP. For the longest time, I said if I was ever going to go back to charter, it would only be at a KIPP school. I love their program. But that is one version of a charter, and that's not all versions of charters, and everyone is different because you do have that autonomy. But I would venture to say, back to the point, is 100%, that's what I think happened. I think that it was a great concept, but then when people wanted to put it into practice, The places where they wanted to put it into practice were like, no, 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 not here. And so people went and they put it, they put the, like you said, they put the schools where they were allowed to, and that happened to be in traditionally underserved neighborhoods. And so that's
So
why.
here's what's going to be interesting, because charter schools have shown some positive gains.
Definitely.
Many in many states now have an open. I don't want to say open enrollment because that's not where I'm trying to go. They're not just held to the lowest performing demographic anymore.
No.
They're not geographically bound anymore. So I would be interested to see, probably in as short as a 5-year time frame, charters are now allowed to open in more affluent areas. What will happen when
Oh,
that occurs?
I can
Because
tell you
it's
what will happen, because where you are, in Cleveland, there's a suburb called Parma. And Parma has a system within a system. And I can speak to it because my children went to that system, the subsystem. There is a network of charter schools called Constellation Schools in
yes,
Parma. They historically only put their schools, and they were very strategic about where they put their schools. They have great academic achievement records, but they are also in areas with more affluent families. And what they have honestly created in Parma is a subculture where in the Constellation schools in Parma Heights, all the white children go there.
mm,
Go to if you the school in Parma. Now, if you go to the actual public schools in Parma, what you'll see is parents not necessarily, almost the exact opposite. They moved out of Cleveland into Parma. Parma's a suburb. They moved out of Cleveland into Parma, thinking that they were getting a suburban education. So they're not considering a charter, because they're like, we're in this suburban
right.
district now, so I don't need to put my kids in the charter. Whereas the white parents are like, well, I need another option to get my kids out of this school, and that option has been Constellation charters, and they are primarily, very, very white. And again, I say this because my children went there. Because at the time, those were the decisions I made because I was living in that area. And I wanted the charter experience. I wanted the small, I wanted all the other things that Denecia was saying. And that was the option available to me. So that's where my children went. So it has been a interesting experience because Parma has begun to fight back, because it does remove some funding from their schools, and they are feeling the crunch in terms of their state funding, not their local, because their local is unaffected because the charters don't get local funding, but their state funding is affected because there effectively is an entire sub district operating within and they're a very large district, so it has begun to hit them in their pockets. And so they have begun to, it's interesting to watch. That would be definitely an area to watch in the upcoming months and years to see how it plays out, because that's exactly what they're doing in Parma.
Oh,
So
wow.
interesting that
Yeah.
you brought that up. So, but I guess I get to wrap this up, and I hope that everybody listening was able to get some understanding of what a charter is now, how it's different, dispel some of the fallacies in terms of what people say about charters versus what charters really do. In your opinion, Denecia, just to wrap it all up, is what place do you see charters as having as we move forward in education? Is there still a place, like, was it a grand experiment whose time has come and it's time to let it go? Or is there still a place for charter schools in traditional education?
I believe with parent choice, there's always going to be a place. I believe there are enough children to go around between the three different educational models: charter, public, and private. And as long as there are disagreements with how a child is educated in one system versus another, it's going to involve moving those kids around, almost like chess pieces. So I think charter is here to stay. I think that uh, the autonomy that they have been able to work through may start to come to an end a little more because they're starting to gain more eyes on them. So I think that you'll see that kind of change up, I think, because they're demanding a bigger piece of the pie now. Here are the results. So we should get more than the quarter. Can we at least get 35%, 45%? But with, more pie, you got a bigger bellyache. So we'll see where that goes in the future. But I definitely think that the whole charter movement is here to stay. Yeah.
Well, I thank you so much for being here with us today. Parents, if you are interested in charters in your area, just do a quick Google search, I think, and see what comes up, because it's definitely an option that I think that is worth exploring. Well, what do you think? Is a charter school an option for your family? I encourage you to continue to do some research for yourself before you decide. Thanks again to our guest, Denecia Dillard, and thank you for listening. Show notes and resources to everything we've talked about today are available on our website, justlikemepresents.com. Share this podcast with other educators in your circle, and be sure to hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. Next week, diversity in higher education. What does it look like, and why is it important that we advocate for it? Thanks again for listening, and remember, if our children can see it, they can achieve it.
Are you sick and tired of being sick and tired of the low levels of literacy that plague the Black community? Well, guess what? This didn't happen overnight. And the root cause is most definitely racism. My name is Seisha Beckett Abdullah, and I am the creator and host of Real Reading Talk, where I not only discuss the real issues in a unapologetic, no sugarcoating chaser type of way, but I also offer real solutions. So please join me every week where you will find Real Reading Talk on most podcast platforms like Apple, Spotify, and Anchor.
Welcome to Puffcast, your bi-weekly Harry Potter podcast, run by Puffs. I'm Melanie.
And I'm Juliana. Do you like Harry Potter and Fantastic Beasts?
Oh, yes.
Oh, good. Are you looking for a fun, stress-free place to just have a good conversation, play some silly games, and hear from some great guests?
Yes, please tell me more.
Oh boy, well then this podcast is for you.
We would like to invite you to join our happy common room. Get comfy, have some pizza, make new friends, and be part of the conversation. All houses are welcome.
You can find Puffcast every other Wednesday on all platforms where podcasts are found. So we'll see you in the common room. And until then, stay puffy.
And badger on.